So, Tim, I just wanted you to, if you had any wisdom for this gentleman here, what would that be?
Yeah, so I'm going to take a step back and just iterate. You asked him some questions when he got down here about his day, and I think it's brilliant what you're doing in terms of forcing him to have to think about what did he do, what went well, what didn't go well, and what can he do to make what didn't well go better. And then the other question I would ask is the things that you did well, why did you do them well? And why do you think that you're doing them well? Because oftentimes it's the things that we do well that we dismiss, and we don't acknowledge the competency that we have in that area. And that's a really big thing, because that ends up being a strength that often gets dismissed when in fact it needs to be linked to the work that you've done, because that's what creates the confidence to go out and impose your will on another competitor. Because at this level of competition that you're at, it's all about imposing your will upon another person. And that comes from inner strength and inner knowing. And when you have that, it should permeate from you to where people feel it and it scares them. And that's part of the dangerous piece that we were talking about last night. Like this part of you should be so dangerous that you could hurt someone, but you don't, because you can control it. So that's one piece. The other piece that I would say, because of your aspiration, is how clear can you see it? Like when I say that, like, can you visualize yourself as that individual that is competing at that level? And when I say that is when you see it, like it, that Sean, the future Sean, requires a different identity than you currently have right now. Does that make sense to you?
It does, yeah.
Because the identity of someone who is a champion, who is a Hall of Famer, who's a world champion, a gold medalist or whatever, that identity requires, like, there's a huge responsibility in that. But it requires the physical, the mental, the emotional, and spiritual alignment to be the person that can actually hold the space for what's required to do that. That's the future Sean, right? You're here. There's a gap between where you are and where you want to go, and that gap needs to be filled by you doing the work and linking the work that you're doing to the confidence you're building, to the capabilities, the skills that you're building. So like when your dad's asking you, like, what did you work on today? Like that's actually a big deal. Like you might not think that the rolling on the mat or doing this movement or that arm bar or whatever it is that you're working on is that big of a deal, but it's like the mastery that is required to be this is developed now. Like the work that you're doing, you have to get to mastery sooner than later. And the only way you get there is by being technically precise now, and then repeating it over and over and over again until you build a bigger capacity to be able to do it in any situation, whether you're fatigued, whether you're going against the current world champion or whatever. The more capacity you have to be able to do that one movement in any situation, in any circumstance, whether you're fatigued, whether you're coming off of being sick or whatever, the more you could do it without thinking. And that's why you think during practice. You create an intentionality during practice so that you don't have to think during competition. Like the GOATs, and we had this conversation today, the greatest competitors of all time practice harder than they compete. Because if they practice as they were gonna compete, then they're going to fatigue, and then at some point they're not going to be able to compete at that same level because they're fatigued. But if they practice at a higher level than they actually compete, then they have margin, that this reservoir left over for them to be able to compete more freely. There's no thinking. It's all like pattern recognition. Oh, this is coming. I know that's coming. And then I just automatically know I'm going to do this. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
But the only way to get there is being so focused in this now moment during practice that you give everything you have and more into that. Because right now you don't have a clue on what your limit is. And whatever you think your limit is, I'm telling you right now, it's way more than you think. And the only way to know is to push during practice beyond what you think you can do. So when you're super tired or you feel like you're going to throw up, how can you draw more so that you do another rep and another rep and then another rep and then another rep? Like, being pushed like that is how you build a bigger engine. And the only way to have the fortitude to do that is if you're clear about who you are and what it's going to require of you, so that you can actually, that goal of being there isn't something to work to, it's something to work from. You bring it to you so that now you're working from that space in order to get there. Do you see the difference between that? Because if you work to it, you're not there. But if you bring him back to you, you're him. Now you're just working from that space to acquire the skills that are required to be there. It's a big difference in how you see from getting from point A to point B.
That makes sense, yeah.
Okay. That would be my take.
No, I think it's amazing. Can you also you talk about this in the office today about the holistic approach? There's a lot of people that are, let's say Sean is immersing himself in wrestling.
Yep.
But it's not just the skills of wrestling. You've got nutrition, you've got conditioning, you've got mindset, but then also you've got education in school, you got relationships, because you can't just be good in one silo. Can you explain that?
Thank you for bringing that up, because again, if there's so many kids right now, and even like I remember all I wanted to do was play professional football. Like, that's all I wanted to do. And yet there was something in me that said, but you're still responsible for your academics. And so I went all in on academics too. And it was because I did that. I was able to get into the Air Force Academy and whatever, right? Like it was that dual approach. But here's the thing about the holistic piece is like, you can't forego something else because you think you don't have time for it. It's your responsibility to, again, this future Sean, when you see him, you have to see him as someone who's got the social skills to be able to have a conversation with maybe a potential business partner that you meet. You have to be socially aware and attuned enough to be able to make that connection and have the conversation and not think, I don't have time for this. Because the moment you think you don't have time for it, then opportunity passes you by. Same thing with like relationships. Do you have a girlfriend right now?
Yeah.
And so there's a fine line between having a girlfriend and the distraction that it creates from building what you want to build. And yet there's opportunity there to learn how to communicate your emotions more authentically, in a way for you to be more connected to you, right? Because that you learn how to connect in relationship. And so you're in a relationship, and so a relationship isn't about taking. A relationship is about a give and take. It's a harmonious, symbiotic organism. And so you actually have to learn how to open your heart and be able to express your emotions, because when you find the woman you want to marry, that's going to be extremely important for the connection that's required to have a beautiful relationship and a beautiful marriage. Does that make sense?
It does.
Then the same thing about your health. Your health isn't just about being in the weight room or being on the mat, and it's not just about eating well, and it's not just about your sleep, and it's not just about drinking water instead of battery acid. Like it's about doing all of it. And it's also not about being so hyper vigilant about one thing in exclusion of every other thing, because you still have to live your life. And then that's another piece of the pie is, are you enjoying what you're doing? Is there an outlet for you, a hobby for you? Is there something else besides wrestling that you do, or jiu-jitsu, that allows you to express yourself or have fun, right? Like, do you have anything outside of wrestling right now?
You like to cook.
Yeah, okay, baking.
He likes baking.
Great, that's awesome. So then
He's good at it too.
that's something that if it is a passion of yours, then you can take classes, you can refine your ability to do it and do it concurrently. You have to find time and make time. Otherwise, what happens is I call it a life arena. It's a wheel of life or whatever you want to call it. And your goal is to have, out of a scale from 0 being in the center to 10 being the outer rung, like most people, and this is what we talked about today, the greatest of all time in the sports that that you're familiar with, often are 10s in their sport, but is 0 to 2 in their relationship, and maybe a 5 or 6 in their health, and maybe a 0 in their social structure, because all they do is work out and are so committed to this one rung that their wheel is oblong. If you try to roll it, it actually wouldn't roll. It would stop, because you have one big rung and then nothing left after that, right? So how can you look at your life and see what is important to you, and how can you build that now? Because if you don't do it now, you're not going to do it in 5 years. You're definitely not going to do it in 10, until you have a point where life breaks you down and you have so much pain that you're forced to look at these other areas. Because if you're a one-man show and you have no friends because all you do is work out and roll around on a mat, and then if that goes away, what are you left with? Nothing, right? And so how can you build this concomitantly, concurrently, or simultaneously, so that you are constantly allowing your wheel to get bigger and bigger and bigger? And that's what creates a full life. And then when you become an Olympian, or you become a MMA superstar, then you have an entire ecosystem that can enjoy it with you. And you have the health to be able to do it for as long as you want on your terms, instead of being a one-hit wonder, because all you did was focus on this one thing and you didn't take care of all these other things. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Got one last question for
Yeah.
you. This is important, especially coming from Coach Tim, that works with NFL superstars, Olympians, gold medalists, and famous people and celebrities and all this other stuff. This is a major coach, right? So, Coach, my question is this: how does somebody, whether it's a collegiate aspiring athlete like Sean, or one of your superstar athletes, MVPs or Super Bowl champions or whatever it might be, how do they deal with adversity? How do they deal with loss? How do they deal with injury? Because when you're trying so hard to go to an Ivy League school or D1 school, everything is so important. And if he's got a loss on a match, or he's going to nationals this week, and if he doesn't win or whatever, you're like, what's your advice? How do you deal with adversity and loss?
Such a great question. And I'm going to bring it back to the questions that you asked when Sean came down here. And that is, well, let me first go big picture on this. the sooner you can get to the point where you understand that everything is feedback, then you're less likely to put meaning on any of it. And so your goal is taking whatever is coming into you as data. Like a win or a loss is not good or bad. A win or a loss is an opportunity to learn. Even if you win, you have to fight to go figure out what could you have done better. Why did you win? Because oftentimes winning, you can win and not play well or perform well. You can still win. That doesn't mean that you don't get your lesson. In fact, it's harder to get a lesson after a win because you assume that you were good enough to win, when the reality is he could have just had a bad day, or you could have just got lucky, right? You have to search for what that is, and the only way to get it is through feedback. And so the moment you could take meaning away from what's presented to you, the faster you're going to accelerate your progress, because it's all about the feedback, right? And the sooner you understand that, then you're like, even in your hunt for colleges, it's just feedback. Why did one school respond immediately and another didn't? It's just data. It doesn't mean, there's no meaning in it. The moment you put meaning on it is the moment you bias your ability to make a decision moving forward. Because if you say it's good, then you don't see the bad in the situation. Because there's always a negative to a positive situation. And there's always a positive to a negative situation. And it's your responsibility to find both. So when something great happens to you, if you don't find that negative and neutralize that good, then life is going to show you something bad. Same thing with if you lost and you think your world's over, the reality is, what's the good in that loss? There's a benefit to that loss. What is it? And you have to find it. And it's not superficial. It's like, I got to work harder. That's not it. There's something deeper there that you have to go out and seek. And so for me, when there's adversity, when there's a loss, when there's an injury, it's just feedback. So, for me, like even with what's going on with you, it's giving you an opportunity to look at your life differently, and also look at, wow, I have disregarded my body in such a way that I've compensated so much. I'm lucky I didn't have a worse issue than I do now, right? And so it's like, how can you reframe the situation, but like instantly, not like the faster you can come to neutrality and bring, because good and bad, it's the same line. And what's good for you is bad for somebody who's 50 steps ahead of you. And what's bad for them might be extraordinary for you right now. But the reality is they're the same coin, just a different face. And the sooner you can bring it into this center neutrality place, this center point, you realize nothing is good or bad. It just is. And that's like, if there's one thing I could give a young, aspiring athlete, it's that. Because I can't tell you how many D1 athletes I work with that put meaning on everything. I made a mistake. You make a mistake in that moment, your goal is to build a skill to where you can get your lesson immediately. What did I need to do better? And then boom, move on. And if you can't do that, you just compartmentalize it. Like most great athletes have amnesia. Like, yeah, I don't even remember making that mistake.
What does Andre Petrosky from the UFC say?
Champions have short rounds.
Which means what?
I forget the losses.
Exactly. Once they happened, they're lessons now. There's not something that should weigh you down. So, Coach Tim, this has been very, very, very helpful. Sean, what did you think about the information you got from Coach?
That was really good.
All right.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, heck yeah, right?
Keep the video and watch it.
Absolutely. I want to just thank you
Thank you for
again
watching.
for pouring into it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, stop.